Hello, good evening. My name is Richard Cobden. I'm the Digital Media Officer with Sussex Wildlife Trust, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be having a fascinating talk from Phil Gardner, who is going to be telling us all about springtime in Crete. Just to say, if you look on your Zoom toolbar down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's a Q&A button. If you have any questions about the talk, if you just type them in there, and then if we've got time at the end, we will hopefully go through a few of those and get some answers from Phil. So hopefully this talk is going to be the calm before the storm. Let me introduce you to Janet Knott, who's going to tell us a bit more about tonight's talk. Hi, Janet.
Hi, good evening, Richard, and thanks again for your time and to the Sussex Wildlife Trust for hosting our talks for us. We're really grateful.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. So I'm Janet Knott, the Secretary of the Sussex Wildlife Trust's Eastbourne local group, and I'd like to welcome you to our February talk. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope you'll join us again for our March online talk as BTO, that's the British Trust for Ornithology, their Garden Birdwatch Officer, Rob Jacks, explains how we can help birds by observing and recording them. So it should be really interesting too. Now, I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's talk by our Eastbourne group's Phil Gardner, who'll be taking us on a wonderful springtime walk around Crete. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Janet. Hopefully people can hear me. People can see me. Right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Janet. As Richard said, yeah, let's look for something a bit calmer. And so let's take you away from storms, Dudley and Eunice, and we'll head for the balmier climes of Crete in the spring. Now, normally my wife and I are independent travellers, like to do our own thing, but with a holiday like springtime in Crete, we thought, no, we need to go with people who really know their way around. And so we chose to go with Nature Trek, but of course other companies do tours to Crete. They run 3 8-day tours in Crete in late March and early April. We opted for the middle tour in early April. We were a bit worried about how overly organised these holidays might be, but our tour leaders, Jason Mitchell and Bruce Middleton, were absolutely brilliant, had a very relaxed approach, and this meant for a wonderful holiday. There were 14 guests in all, and we were split across 2 minibuses. So it meant that, you know, we weren't too crowded and we were able to get about and see everything. So let's start. We flew to Heraklion from Gatwick, and from there we picked up the minibuses and we headed across the island from Heraklion along the coast to Rethymno and then down to Plakias, which was going to be our base for 4 nights. And then after that, we headed up to near the Akrotiri Peninsula and the town of Harnia, which at one stage used to be the capital of the island of Crete. Crete is the largest of the Greek islands, 160 miles across from east to west, and at its widest point, it's 35 miles wide. Now, we stayed in a very comfortable hotel down in Plakias. This was the view that greeted us most mornings. We did get a fair bit of sunshine. It was like early summer day most of the time, shorts and t-shirts most of the time, a bit cooler in the evenings. But this was our view, and that was the view in the other direction. We did at one stage have a lovely wander all along a cliff path that runs along the edge here. So we'll come on to that a bit later on. But I say the hotel was very comfortable. In the evenings, we went down to local tavernas. Most of the time, Jason and Bruce would run us down in the minibuses as well. So here we go. First of the plants. This was just outside in the hotel grounds, so we didn't have to go far to find much. And this was a beautiful pink Cretan cistus, as the title shows. It looks rather like tissue paper, doesn't it? Absolutely amazing plant. And another one not far away from where we were staying was this lovely white asphodel. Now, our first excursion was to the Turkish bridge, a very ancient bridge. And as you can see, there's a ford across there as well. And this was an amazing place for both the botanists and the birders amongst us. Here we've got a general view of the scenery in the area. We normally visit Crete in September, and so it's usually a much drier looking area. So it's amazing to see it with greenery and trees, etc. It was an amazing time. The guides, Jason and Bruce, couldn't quite believe their luck, because while we were wandering around up and down the stream and up and down the bridge, etc., we came across 3 different sandpipers. First we saw was the green sandpiper. Then we saw the common sandpiper. And finally, we were rewarded with the wood sandpiper. I say the guys couldn't believe it, because, you know, it's great to see 1 or 2, but to see all 3 in the one location without really having to move much was quite amazing. Now, at this point, the birders decided to cross over the Turkish bridge, and the botanists went wandering around the roadside, etc., looking for plants. Those of us who crossed over were rewarded with an amazing view of a juvenile black-crowned night heron, just in the undergrowth. And it stood there all the time we were there without batting an eyelid, didn't move at all. I suppose there was about 7 or 8 of us at that point, but it didn't worry itself at all. It just sat there and let us take some really good photos of it. Crossing back over the bridge, actually on the bridge was this lovely mallow plant with what is apparently a southern speckled wood butterfly on it. Slight variation from our own speckled wood, but a lovely southern speckled wood. We drove on, we were heading towards a monastery, but we stopped en route, partly to look at the plants, but also to take in this memorial, which is dedicated to the Andati, who were the Greek resistance fighters. The history of the island, it's been invaded many, many times by the Turks and various other people. The last invasion was in the Second World War, when Germany landed, causing quite a surprise attack on the island, because there were Allied troops on the island, and they had to evacuate because they were overrun by the sheer number of Greeks who appeared on the by paratroop and landing, etc. The one on the left is, of course, dedicated to the Greek Orthodox priests who helped the Andati and were part of the resistance fighters. But while we were in the area, we obviously had a look around at the plants. One of the other plants, we saw white asphodel earlier. Well, here we've got yellow asphodel in the scrub surrounding the memorial. And this was a plant we came across quite often. It's green spiny spurge, but also known by its more common name, not surprising, chicken wire plant, because if you can see, when you study it, it almost looks the way the shape of the twigs, etc., the branches, it is just like a chicken wire. Now, the guys were really good, Bruce and Jason. Every day in the morning, they went off in the minibuses to the local supermarkets, and they loaded up with a lovely selection of beer, wine, cheeses, bread, etc. And we had picnics. And this was the one of the picnic stops. We just sort of sat down and looked down, and there was this lovely little Cretan iris. Now, this plant, stunning little plant, but it's only 4 or 5 inches tall, so very easy to miss. Typical iris plant, but only very, very small. Having had our lunch, we up in the hills, we headed back to Plakias, and we went out, as I said, we looked out along the coastal path on the beach above Plakias. And first thing we found was this amazing plant, Cretan birthwort, or Dutchman's pipe. Not surprising, really, when you see the shape of it, just like a Dutchman's pipe. Now, this plant is the food source for a fairly rare Cretan butterfly, which is on an international red list of endangered species. So we all kept our eyes open as we walked along. And it didn't take too long for us to be rewarded. This female butterfly was actually down on a rock, so a fair way below us. It's the Cretan festoon butterfly, and she was resting on a rock below the path. Now, not much further along, we came across a male, which at first glance looks a bit like an Apollo butterfly. But then We were patient, we waited, and it opened its wings, and we were rewarded with this beautiful sight. Shade of swallowtail about the colouring, but still a fabulous butterfly. And it's quite, as I say, it's on an international red list. So we were very, very lucky to have seen it. Now this plant, tiny little plant, about 10, 15 millimeters across, is variegated anchusa, found mainly in the western end of Crete. And again, very lucky to see it. A tiny little plant which you could easily miss. But fortunately, with a group of 14 people and 2 guides, we were all looking in various directions and spotting lots of different things. We didn't always get all the information that we wanted, but most of the time we did. Here we've got rock tulip, literally as its name implies, growing out of the rocks. Not much else to do, but it's very little earth, etc. But it's managed to find a little spot with some nutrients. And this tiny little plant, bit like the iris, only 4 to 5 inches tall, but nevertheless a stunning little plant. Now we're on the path above the beach, and as I mentioned earlier, when the Germans invaded Crete, it took everybody rather by surprise, and the Allies couldn't fight back. They were overwhelmed, so they had to evacuate the troops from the island. And this path and this tunnel was one of the escape routes that they used. And at the other end of that tunnel, you can see there's a shadowy figure there. That was one of our group had already gone through the tunnel. And the Allies actually built an emergency harbour down on the seaside, and a number of troops did actually manage to escape from the island by that through that harbour. Back on the path, we've got here snake's head iris, another lovely plant. There's the side view of it. And it's just plant after plant. This was the amazing thing with the island. You know, we kept on finding them. But as I said at the opening, we would never have known where to go for these plants. But because these tours happen all the time and the expertise is passed on from group to group, then these guys know exactly where to go. And they were very, very good at taking us to all the different places. Now, before you think how long, he's got this one the wrong way round. It should be over, you know, it's not exactly in the right place. Well, this shrubby mullein, which is Verbascum arcturus, was actually growing out of a cliff about 30 feet up. Fortunately, I've got a Canon SX60 bridge camera, which has got a 1350 zoom on it. So I was able to actually get in there and actually take a slightly better close-up of it so you could actually see the detail. But as I say, it was growing about 30 foot up in the cliff face. Quite amazing. Day 3, we started in the Kotsifu Gorge, just above Plakias, and we stopped at this roadside chapel. Had a look inside, not too much to see, it was too dark to take any decent photos, but there were some plants growing around, and one of which was this superb Cretan arum. And I thought it was time to get down on my hands and knees and maybe take a rather arty shot. So here we are with the mountains in the background. Plakias Bay is down here, and we've ascended up through the hills to come up to the Kotsifu Gorge. From Kotsifu, we drove on up into the hills. We travelled east to the village of Spili. And beyond the village, we actually parked by a hillside, renowned for its diverse flora, and we were not disappointed. This amazing plant was growing in the ditch, basically, by the side of the road. There was about a dozen or more of them. The photo doesn't really show you just how tall this is, but this is over 3 foot tall. And not surprisingly, they're known as Robert's giant orchid. We climbed up a very steep bank to get to this amazing place, but what we found was just absolutely incredible. As we climbed up onto the grassy area, first thing was a naked man orchid right by the side of the path as we went up. And as you can see, as its name implies, it's fairly graphic in terms of, yes, it's definitely a naked man orchid. Next one was a milky orchid. As I say, it was at this point that there were orchids everywhere. And Bruce, who was the botanist in the group, he was rushing around because all 14 guests were all going off doing their own thing, being careful not to tread on any plants, etc. But we kept on shouting out that we'd found a plant, and poor old Bruce was rushing around everywhere. So there were a lot of plants, I will admit, that I didn't actually get when we did the record swapping in the evenings in the lounge bar of the hotel. You say, oh, I missed that one. I missed that one. And I'm afraid I'm one of these people, unless I've actually got a photo of it, I don't record it as a species that I've seen. So this was the milky orchid. And just up from that was this beautiful Ariadne's orchid. Lovely detail in there, the wings. Stunning orchid, pink butterfly orchid. I say they were just everywhere. There was a lion's mane orchid, but again, I got a photo, but I'm not 100% certain it was a lion's mane, so I've not included it. Now, for some reason, this is called a sparse flowered orchid, but as you can see, a beautiful yellow orchid, lovely spots, even got an insect on there as well. So we drove on from here. We started to come down from the hills and we were driving towards the coast. But as we were driving along, you just kept seeing flowers everywhere, looking at the verges at the side of the road. And someone said, oh, this looks an interesting spot. There was a sort of curve going around this grassy area. And luckily there was a gravel lay-by opposite. And so we all jumped out of the minibuses, wandered across. And again, we all started wandering around. And we found this beautiful tongue orchid. Now, we did see them throughout the holiday, but this was one of the few that was fully out. So very, very lucky. As I say, most of them were just the buds. Also in this area was a lovely tassel orchid. Tassel hyacinth. And again, I thought, yeah, this definitely needed one of my arty shots laying on the ground. But as I say, I've got a Canon SX60. And that's got a flip out screen. So it does help when you're trying to take something a bit different. But as you see there, we've got the lovely blue sky in the background. And that was the case for most of the holiday. As I say, most of the holiday, we were in shorts and T-shirts. And it was lovely, very relaxing as well. Another plant in this area was blue hound's tongue. Common throughout the Mediterranean, but the flowers, amazingly, this flower is just 10 millimeters across. So quite amazing. Again, luckily with the camera, you can get in there and capture all the detail. But as is always the way with photos, it takes maybe 5, 6, 7 photos to actually get the really good one that you can really happy to use. Now, as we drove down the road, it was my turn. We all, well, most of the group took it in turns to sit in the front of the minibuses. There was one couple who thought it was their right to always sit in the front of one of the minibuses, but it was my turn to sit what we call shotgun. And because, of course, we're driving on the opposite side of the road, I was by the side, by the verge. And we were driving down and I was looking out for things to see. And there was this bird sitting right by, as you can see, in the rock, right by the verge. And it's a toucan, which is a member of the partridge family. And for the oldies amongst us, I don't mean David Cassidy's crowd, the proper partridge family. Beautiful bird, stunning colours. And the amazing thing was, I was driving with Jason that time, and rather than step the engine off, he just rolled down the hill very slowly. And this bird proceeded to run all the way down the side of the road in the ditch for quite a distance. Being in the front, I had to take I had the window down, so I had to take photos for everybody else in the group. So cameras were being passed around at quite a rate of knots while we could still see this bird. from here, we reached down to the coast at a place called Timbarki. And this was the good thing about the guys. If they were thirsty, if we were thirsty, all we had to do was say, sorry, we need a loo break, we need a refreshment break. And they'd find somewhere we could stop. And we stopped at a lovely cafe, and we either had beers, ice creams, coffees or something. So as I say, it meant for a very relaxed atmosphere. Now, when we left Timbarki, we headed to a nearby lagoon in Kokinos. There were lots of birds, but all of them were behind. There was a big wire fence around part of the lagoon, so it made getting any decent photos very, very difficult. One I did manage to get was this flock of ruff that were in the water. And we also had a number of flypasts by some black-crowned night herons. So there were about a flock of about 40, and they spent some time flying around. It's quite surprising how long they were there. Now, one other very unusual sighting of this lagoon was a spur-wing lapwing or plover, but it moved away very quickly before anyone could get a photo. But because of its rarity and because it was such an unusual bird, I did have to include a photo that I will admit is not mine. In fact, nobody in the group was able to get a photo despite some amazing equipment. And so I downloaded this from the net just to show you how striking this bird is. It was a long way away and it scurried off into the undergrowth. They think it was a migrant about to head south. Now, from the coast, we went back up into the hills. This time we were in the mountains above Spilly, where we'd seen all the orchids earlier. And this was a very interesting spot. The first thing was, you can just about see in the background there, a road. And from the road to get to this spot, we had to, down in the ditch there, behind those bushes was a stream. And then we had to negotiate up round the back of the hillside to eventually come to here. Bruce and Jason helped us across. There was a log bridge, although that had moved in the winter storms. But we did eventually get up there. We come specifically to find a rainbow bee orchid, which we'll see in a minute. But it's a great shame that we've not got smelly vision here, because these bushes were Daphne, wild Daphne, and the smell from these was absolutely amazing. As I say, it's a shame you can't smell it because it was beautiful. And as I say, one of the reasons we came up here was to try and find this fairly rare orchid, the rainbow bee orchid. And again, tiny little plant, but somehow someone in the group managed to find it. And there is a photo of it, a rainbow bee orchid. Now, day 4 saw us, we were still down in Placias. This time we headed west to an area around Frango Castello. There's this huge scrubby area either side of the road, and that produced a nice set of plants, including this spotted rock rose. We also had pale bugloss, which is a cousin, distant cousin of course, the Viper's bugloss, which we all know as a prolific coastal plant. I mean, I'm down on Langley Point in Eastbourne, and we can walk over later in the year and there'd be bugloss, Viper's bugloss growing everywhere along the coast here. But this was a similar coastal area, but this time we had pale bugloss. This is Cretan mallow, unique or native to Crete. Now, there was one bird that, again, we managed to see through the telescope, but again, it was out of range. But again, I've been cheeky and I've downloaded an image from the web, which is very, very similar to the scrub where we saw it. And of course, it was the hoopoe. I mean, they're fairly common out there, but this was none of us were actually able to get a decent shot of it. So I felt I have to include it because it is such a common bird out there. As I say, there is a castle at Frango Castello. they were actually doing some restoration work on it, so we weren't able to get inside it. But it does show you the castle actually exists. Now from here, we headed up into the mountains and we were going to the Imbros Gorge. Now this was an 8-kilometer walk and it was just before lunch, late morning. So we called into a taverna where we fortified ourselves with Slovakian pie. Now the pie is like a thin crepe stuffed with soft cheese and drizzled with Cretan honey. Now that sounds a really strange mixture, but it was absolutely delicious, especially if you wash it down with a Mythos Greek lager. Now this gorge, we've actually walked it in the summer and it's a lovely place to walk. But unfortunately, the path had virtually been washed away. There'd been some horrendous storms, and we'll see later on with some other photos. And the gorge path, which would normally be a nice steady path, had actually been washed away. And as you can see here, basically all you've got is rock-strewn rubble all the way down the path, which made it very, very heavy going. And to cap it all, that was one of the days when it actually rained. So we did get to a cafe taverna at the bottom, which was very welcome relief. But I have to say, we were amongst the last to arrive. It was played havoc on your knees trying to walk on. It's like walking on, if anybody's done the Beachy Head walk, it's walking over large rocks and boulders. It was very much like that, only for 8 kilometers. To be fair, the guides did say that the group the week before had not done the walk because the weather was so bad. And if they had known how bad the path was, there's every chance that we wouldn't have done the walk because it was quite dangerous in places. So now we've finished our time down on the south coast. We've been down here at Plakias, and now we're moving up to Harnia, the Akrotiri Peninsula, where we moved up. We stopped off at a couple of places en route, and one of the places we stopped at was a Minoan cemetery at Armeni. It dates from 1400 to 1200 BC. Cemetery was full of orchids and other interesting plants. This is the acorn from a Valonia oak tree. I was tempted to bring it back, but of course there's all manner of problems with importing goods like that. So it was left on a shelf for other people to view. One of the orchids that we saw was Heldrike's orchid. And here's the entrance to one of the Minoan tombs. There's 231 tombs on this site. And this is one of the entrances, quite steep descent into it. And then that's the entrance. As you can see, it's quite a low entrance, so they would have had to bend down to get into it. And this is the image. This was taken from one of the display boards, but it actually shows you the interior of one of these tombs that have been carved out. And each tomb, each chamber is for one family. So they would have buried different members of the family in there. Moving on to Harnia. We stopped at, these were the arrows indicate the different places that we were going to visit while we were here. Green arrow is for the Omelos Plateau, and that's where we were hoping to see Baker's tulip, other things. Laki, where we stopped for a lovely coffee break and other interesting things. Agia, where there's a lovely lake, and then the Akrotiri Peninsula, all on different trips. Now here we've got the White Mountains, which we were there, as I say, in early April, and they're still capped with snow in March, April. And in fact, their name comes from the fact that they're covered in snow in the winter, and in the summer, these are limestone mountains. And so the sun shining on them makes them look white. And one of the villas that we stayed at did look across at the White Mountains. And yes, I've got some amazing sunset photos of the White Mountains, gorgeous sunsets, which you get out there. en route to our hotel in Harnia, we stopped off at, as it says, the Souda Bay Allied War Cemetery. Now it's quite an amazing place. We visited it twice, and it's run by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and there are around 1,500 servicemen from around the Commonwealth buried or commemorated in this cemetery. 19 of them are from World War I, but the majority, there's about 750 that are named, and the others are just commemorated in this cemetery. And it's beautifully done, as with all Commonwealth War Graves Commission, great cemeteries. It's beautifully maintained, and I mean, it's in a gorgeous location. It's a lovely moving place to visit. And one of the very interesting facts is that they bury the aircrew according to the aircraft that they were flying. So in this case, we've got aircrew from a Lancaster. So you've got the 7 people who would have been the crew of the Lancaster. You had smaller bombers like Wellingtons, Mosquitoes, Spitfires, etc. So there would be groups of graves, and it's quite lovely to think that they've been buried together as well as they fought together and died together. So as I say, quite a moving place. Unfortunately, as you can see from the weather changed, and it was rather damp by the time we finished our visit there. So we moved on to Harnia. We settled into our hotel, which was the Halipa, which was the former British Embassy. Amazing place. It had a new annex built on the back, so it was a very, very comfortable hotel, just slightly on the outskirts. So it did mean that when we wanted to get to Tavernas, again, Bruce and Jason had to run us down. We weren't within walking distance, but that wasn't a problem. Those guys were willing to do the driving for us, which was really good. So here we were starting the second half of our holiday. We had a trip into the mountains, the White Mountains. And I say we were heading for the Omelos Plateau. Now, this was one occasion where you were glad that you'd maybe got a fleece and even a hat with you, because the temperature when we got out in the minibus to see the view here was, it was a bit chilly. We were hoping to see pastures full of Baker's tulips and crown anemones, but sadly, due to the bad winter they'd experienced, everything was a bit behind. Now, en route to the Omelos Plateau, we stopped off in a village of Lackey and we had a coffee break. And I got a feeling it was Sunday because they were all going to church, and they were all coming out of church and coming into the cafe as well. But this amazing statue was erected to commemorate 3 generations of freedom fighters when the island's been invaded in 1821, 1921, and again in 1941 with the Germans. So there's 3 figures, all in traditional dress, commemorating the 3 different occasions where the island has been invaded. Now, as I mentioned, the weather had caused some caused some problems. And while we were in Lackey, we actually saw some visible effects of this. We can't quite work out. I think this was the remains of a property. There had been landslides. The amount of water that had fallen was phenomenal. Here you could see a landslide. A rock had come down and smashed completely this van. Unfortunately, knowing the Greeks, I think we could go back. We were there in 2019. I think we could go back there now, 3 years later, and still find that van stuck there. But here you've got an indication of just how bad the roads were. And here we've got a complete section of the road has disappeared, and that's been washed away because of the rain. That has slid down, and when you come around the other side of the hairpin, somewhere down to the right, there would be a landslide across half of the road. And this was the case as we found our way up into the mountains and coming back down again. There were places where there was roadworks going on, but somehow they managed to get some incredibly heavy plant equipment into the villages, despite the fact that these roads must have been quite unsafe. So here we were up above the Omelos Plateau, and we were at the top of the Samaria Gorge. We didn't have time to go down there, but we did have a stop there. It was actually where we had a rather misty picnic lunch. There was a picnic area, and again, the guys got the goodies out and spread them out around the various tables, and we had a lovely lunch. Here, it's almost the equivalent of a house sparrow, Sardinian warblers everywhere. but actually trying to get a photo of one, getting one to stay still is quite a lucky thing. Again, one that you keep snapping away, and eventually you manage to get one. As I say, we were hoping for fields of these. In a normal year, the fields on the Omelos Plateau would absolutely be chocker with Baker's tulips, but we did at least see some. And another plant nearby was the poppy anemone. They come in a variety of colours, blues, etc. Now, we'd seen on the way up that there'd been some bad damage at a place called Alikianos. And this is a bridge called the Crete Bridge. Now, it's got incredible historical importance to the local community. Sadly, in April 1941, 108 local men were taken by the Germans in reprisal for attacks, etc., resistance work. And they were lined up by this bridge and shot. As well as being a memorial almost to those people, it also provided a vital road link across the river. And this picture shows it as it used to be. Now, in February the 24th, 2019, it started raining, and it continued raining for 3 days, depositing more than 250 millimetres of rain, 10 inches of rain in 3 days. The region would normally get that amount of rain over several months, but the volume of water coming down caused the bridge to collapse. And that's part of what's left. And if anybody, it's the Crete Bridge, make a note of that, because if you search online for Crete Bridge in 2019, there is an amazing video on the web of a camera crew. There was a local camera crew, TV channel, was filming the bridge, and they actually captured the moment when it collapsed. It's horrendous to watch, but it was quite amazing to actually see a video of it. But you can see that's the buttress of one of the, there, just taken away and flattened. But you could imagine this river was a raging torrent all the way down, the debris still there. And we were there, what, 2 months after this had happened. So from the bridge, we drove down to the Agia Lake. Now, this is the largest area of wetland in Crete, formed by damming a strong natural spring. We saw pochard, purple heron, and gargany. And here we've got a view of a gargany. And the shades down the side here is, I managed to get this shot through the reeds and just captured it as it was swimming between the reeds. That was about the best view we got. But then one of the other birds that we spotted and we were chasing round the lake were 3 little crakes. And I managed to track them around the lake, and again, most probably took about 30 photos between the reeds, etc. And finally, my reward was this photo. And I decided, right, that's it. I've got my photo. That's the one that's going to do. And there was a nearby lakeside cafe, so we ate some delicious cake and coffee. So that was my reward for chasing the bird around the lake. Now, day 7 was our last full day, and we headed onto the Akrotiri Peninsula just above Hania. Now, some of the group felt quite religious, and they decided to visit the Agia Triada Monastery, whilst the rest of us went in search of plants and birds. Now, here we've got a dragon arum bud. But then, just up the road, there is a dragon arum in full flower. Bird life was fairly active. Managed to catch sight of a female collared flycatcher. This tiny bird, I will admit that I've blown this up quite a lot, and I've just managed to capture it, but it was a fair old distance away, but I did manage to get one decent shot of it, and it was quite happily flying around for quite a long time. But again, as with all flycatchers, as most of us know, they flit around, and trying to actually get one to stay still enough to get a photo is quite amazing. So I was very pleased to get that. But another striking bird, which was very obliging, and it perched on trees quite close to the minibus, was this beautiful male woodchat shrike. And he was really very good because he stayed around, even though there was a shower of rain. You can see the drops, raindrops here. You got that lovely chestnut there. So yeah, we had quite a long time watching that bird, and it was really lovely. We drove on to the Gurvanito Monastery, which is situated near the coast. And this gave us some more orchids. One of them is the very aptly named yellow orchid, which we found in a monastery car park. Not a monastery garden, but a monastery car park. And another one, which everybody amongst the botanists was delighted to find, was this Fleischmann's orchid. As I say, we had delicious lunches every day. And our last one was eaten in the monastery car park, where we received the attention of one of the monastery cats, who received, after pestering us, he received quite a few tidbits. So we'll finish our look at Crete in the springtime with a very contented monastery pussycat, and the Greek message which reads, "Thank you very much, kalanichta." Thank you very much, good night. Efaristopoli kalanichta. I hope you've all enjoyed our visit to Crete. And if you get a chance to visit this lovely island in the spring, would thoroughly recommend it. The Nature Trek website, as I say, other companies are available, but the Nature Trek website has got tour reports of all the recent tours, including detailed reports of places and things that were seen, and they're well worth a look. It really gives you an insight into the nature of the holidays and the sort of things that you're going to see and the type of holiday you're going to enjoy. Hope you've all enjoyed it. Apparently there's about 250 of you out there in Zoom land, so let's hope you've had a lovely visit to Crete and forgotten about Storm Eunice that's on her way tomorrow. Back to you, Richard, I think.
Thanks, Phil. That was excellent. Beautiful. I mean, so many gorgeous orchids and birds, brilliant photos. That was really good. No, really took us away from the British winter for a bit there. That was fantastic. We've got a couple of questions in. If you'd like to,
I'll try.
If you can answer those. The first one should be easy. Pamela asks, what was the year that this trip was from?
We were there in 2019, April 2000, very early April 2019. So it would have been, yeah, the last year when things were normal as regards holidays. We were very lucky to get over there then. The trips are on again, I do believe. So, and they do get booked up. So, as I say, it's well worth looking at if you're interested in getting over there. We know Crete, we've been to Crete, but I'm very good when it comes to driving around. I can normally remember where I've been and I could take you back to that place, but I can tell you now that I could go back to Crete tomorrow and not remember how and where we visited some of those places, because the knowledge that the Jason and Mitchell and the Jason and Bruce and the other guys, the other tour leaders have got is phenomenal. They know exactly where you're going to go, exactly where you're going to stop. And that's the important thing. The other thing as well, of course, is anybody who's visited Greece and the Greek islands, you're never sure when you're trespassing. And the Greeks have a habit of wandering around with shotguns and things like that. So it's better to go with people who know exactly where you can go and the safe places to go and the places to stop. So yeah, well worth going with some experts.
That sounds very good advice. Kate asks quite a specific question about the rock tulip. In the photo you shared, the leaves were all a very uniform height, and they looked like they'd been chopped off or cut. I wondered if you had any idea why that might be.
The only thing I could think of, I mean, the area where we were is well out of Plakias on a path that's very, I wouldn't have thought was used very much by the locals, because I don't think the locals do much in the way of looking at wildlife, etc. The only thing might be that it could be they were nibbled by sheep. I don't know. That's a possibility. Or goats, of course. That's another thing that it might be. but I can't think of any other reason. But that's the nearest thing I would think of, is possibly sheep, possibly goats.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds likely, doesn't it? John asks, what roughly would be the best dates to experience springtime in Crete?
Well, the tours, as I say, they run from late March to early April, or the middle of April. I can't recall the dates at the moment, but we were certainly there the first week in April. And you can never tell, as I say, the winter had been particularly bad. So it did mean that the baker's tulips were well behind. Luckily, we did see some. But it's like everything, like over here. I mean, you know, if you get a bad winter, it really does affect the spring flowers, etc. And the same is going to apply over there. But the holidays, Nature Trek have always run the holidays late March, early April. So they obviously know that on a percentage basis, that's the best time to go. Yeah,
excellent. Now, Jeff says, Jeff is lucky enough to be going to Crete, Amari, in the middle of the island, in late April and early May. And he asks, what would you suggest that he looks out for?
Oh my goodness. Well, maybe I better go back and see if we can find. I'll quickly whip back and see if we can see where Amari is on the map. No. I mean, it's going to be really, I mean, if he can get across to Plakias, he can get across Harnia, the White Mountains. It depends where he is in respect of the White Mountains, but that's a fabulous place to visit. It's quite a straightforward road to get up there. And the Omelos Plateau, those are the sort of places you're going to, with a bit of luck, certainly by then, hopefully, or maybe the baker's tulips may be over. But birds, butterflies, there's so much to see that I'm sure here, wherever he is on the island, he'll find something of interest. I mean, even when we go in September, we're seeing birds and things, you know, that are great to see. But yeah, as I say, not knowing where Amari is, I can't, and it's not on this map either.
Phil, Jeff has just added a further line to say that it's south of Remioff.
Rethymno? No, Remios.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Hey?
Yes.
Rethymno?
Yeah, that one. South of
Rethymno. Oh, in which case, yeah, he's well placed then, yeah, because there's Spilly, and that's where we saw the orchids. If he as a hint of to where it is, I can only say that the road, we managed to stop at a petrol station where we were able to use their toilet facilities, and this area with the orchids was immediately back down the road, and you'll see these huge Robert's giant orchids in the ditch, and that's your guide as to where the other orchids, the naked man orchid, the sparse flowered orchid, the milky orchid, the Ariadne orchids were all placed. So yeah, get yourself a good map and certainly try and get up into the hills at Spilly, and then I mean, that time of year, with a bit of luck, the Imros Gorge may not be too bad. Fragio Castello, that's along the coast here as well. So that's well, Franco Castello, I should say, well worth a visit. Stop on the road as you're approaching the town, and you've got the scrub either side with all the different plants. So very, very, very lucky man. Yes, I envy him. Enjoy it, Jeff.
Well, excellent. Thank you ever so much, Phil. We've got loads of other comments from Carolyn, Alison, Amanda, Jez, and others, just all saying how much they've enjoyed your talk, and just the sort of taste of spring and summer that you've brought to us this evening as well. So thank you ever so much for spending tonight taking us through the wildlife of Crete.